Welcome to the Expert Edge. This is the show where we bring on experts in their fields of health and wellness practice, and we hear their stories and learn what they see working in the field of diabetes reversal and prevention. So I'm happy to introduce today's guest, Dr. Lum Frundi. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's so good to have you here today. Dr. Frundi is a board-certified pediatrician and founder of Generational Wellbeing. That's an online resource that's dedicated to helping parents overcome mealtime challenges. She likes to focus on practical solutions and emotional support. So she provides parents with the tools they need to create healthy eating habits and reduce mealtime stress. So I'm really excited to share with you how her area of work is going to be very important for you to understand whether you're a parent or a grandparent. But before we dive into that, I would love for you to share with us just a little bit, Dr. Frundi, about how you got started with your interest in this connection between lifestyle and health.
Well, thank you. Thank you again for having me. So I got started about, I would say, about 7 years ago. I have been practicing at this point pediatrics for about 5 years. You know, you talk about eating, healthy eating, but it doesn't really hit you until I got diagnosed with high blood pressure. Now,
Mm.
I do have a family history of high blood pressure and diabetes. And at the point where I got the diagnosis, I was started on medication. I experienced such horrible side effects where I'm like, okay, there has to be some other way. Yes, it runs in my family, but I just did not like the medicine part of it. So I started making changes for myself. At the same time, I had a daughter that now, making changes for myself and experiencing that, and then teaching my daughter how to eat healthy so she doesn't end up with the same diagnosis as me. It made a huge difference where the way I was then talking to my patients were different because I could understand it's no longer, okay, you got to eat how many servings of fruits and vegetables, you have to eat this and eat that or exercise without it until you really experience it and having to put all of that into your schedule, it makes it so different. So from that experience, taking it now into my everyday pediatric work is I take care of kids, but then the parents have to help the kids to make those decisions, right? The parents have to
Absolutely.
model all of that because we end up eating and doing things like our parents did.
And that brings us into that kind of our first question that I wanted to explore with you, which is what have you seen in your practice and your experience as a medical doctor as the links between childhood habits of eating and what we see as adults in terms of their health or disease state?
So, with what I have seen is that we end up eating like our parents eat.
Mm.
So, I say most of the parents that I'll see once you start talking about, oh, okay, we have to start making certain changes here, and the parent may hesitate to make changes because they're not necessarily doing those things. Or even sometimes the kid will like, he can't tell me to eat my vegetables because he's not eating his vegetables. So it becomes where I'm living a lifestyle and I'm modeling that lifestyle to my kids. And my decisions that I'm making as far as lifestyle is concerned are affecting at what point I end up with some diagnosis of a chronic disease. Because as you know, chronic disease doesn't start at the time when you get that diagnosis. It just shows up at that point, but you've had changes as far as your cholesterol level, changes as far as your blood vessels, changes in the system over time where your body can no longer compensate, and then now you get the diagnosis. So sometimes there's that disconnect that, oh, it happened. I just got diagnosed with a chronic disease at a particular point in time, but your body had been giving you feedback time over time. Now there
Mm.
is a genetic component where there's some people who are at higher risk of getting it based on their genes, but it's with more and more research that we're seeing, yes, the genetic part is there, but lifestyle really plays a huge deal as far as genetic imprinting, modulation, and all of that stuff. You can use your lifestyle to make it where you still, even with that risk, do not end up with that diagnosis.
I love that idea that you can actually turn off genetic switches for many diseases because a lot of people don't know that, even though we've probably known this for maybe 20 years now, right? I think they've been
Right,
exploring this area of epigenetics for at least that long. But
right,
there are things we can control through our own lifestyle choices that can turn genes on and off. So we're talking about things that we can do that we actually have control over. We can't pick our parents, right?
right.
But when we look at childhood habits of eating, I think it's so important that as you're working with children, you're seeing the need for some of those things to change. And I know that many of my clients are adults, but when we talk about changes, they're thinking about, well, this is what has always been a comfort food to me, like since I was a kid. This is how my mother fed us. I just remember a client I was talking to not very long ago who shared with me how in her household growing up, the answer to stress was ice cream. And from the time she was very small, if she was upset, her mother would give her ice cream. If she was afraid of something, she got ice cream. If she was rewarded for something, she got ice cream. And her parents, I think, actually ran an ice cream shop. So they had a lot of availability. And she said till the age of like 15 or 16, she did not realize that everybody didn't grow up that way. And she has had to fight, really strong habit patterns around using ice cream, in her case, to deal with negative emotions. So, I think there is such a strong link between what we learn as kids and how our health turns out in the end. So, when you look at that, do you think it's more heredity or more lifestyle that we're actually passing on generationally?
I'll say lifestyle. Yes, there is the genes, right? But I think the lifestyle we pass on to our kids. Like you mentioned, oh, if I'm stressed out, I go for ice cream. Oh, if a kid comes in to get through some painful procedure, if he sits still, I'll give you the ice cream or I'll give you McDonald's or something else, right? So over time, that's the norm. Right. That's how we eat. We've always deep fried our stuff. That's how we eat. We've always done it for all these ages. But the thing that I think has made a huge difference more so in our society is that even though that's how we ate back in the days, there was still an increase in activity level. People were still walking places. People were still kind of physically active. You really had to, when you go to work, you worked, right? Now, adding to how we were eating, and then sedentary lifestyle piling up to it. And then now we're in a place of mass production. So a lot of processed foods out there. Where even if, yeah, you were eating and we said ice cream, the ice cream back then is different from what we have now. Or
Yeah.
it could have been maybe a more natural treat, so to speak. But the processed foods are increasing inflammation in our bodies. And we know inflammation is one of the things that is really the huge trigger to many different chronic disease situation.
And I think we really have changed the way children are fed. Even in the last 15 or 20 years, I have seen so many huge changes. I mean, my children are now in their 30s, but as I walk through the supermarket or Walmart, often children are eating, but rarely is it something that's actually going to give them long-term health. The healthier ones might be eating goldfish crackers, where, the other ones are like a lollipop or hard candy or, you know, something that is really not helpful to them in the long run. So, what are ways that we can help children really create healthy eating habits? Because if we're parents, obviously, we're kind of some of the primary trainers on that. But even if we're grandparents or aunts and uncles, we often have the opportunity to be around our grandchildren, nieces, or nephews at meal times. What are things we can all do as adults to help children create healthy eating habits?
Okay, so there are several things. The first thing is you have to show them how to eat. So we have to model eating the right stuff. You can't tell a kid you have to eat your vegetable, but this kid has never really seen you eat a vegetable. Or you can't tell a kid you got to drink water, but every time they see you drinking something, it's a soda or something like
Mm.
that. And I say that because I've seen that a lot in clinic where like, okay, what are your beverages? Because we drink most of our calories. And when you say, what beverages are you drinking? You drinking water? The parent will either make that face like, yeah, I don't like water in front of the kid. And the kid is like, oh, water is yucky and stuff. We don't have water. Or it's like, well, I keep telling them to drink water, but they always want to go for my soda. Of course, they're going to want to drink what you're drinking. Why are you having me drink water and you're drinking soda? So really modeling is huge.
Mm.
Now, yeah, it's really huge when it comes to that. The second thing is, I know, like we said, the way kids are fed today with the environment in which we are, most of the arts are targeting kids, where it's hard to even control anything outside of your home. So I usually say start within your home, control, be that doorkeeper and of your home, where you're controlling what you bring in the house. Because kids do not have that discipline to say, well, I see a whole box of chips here. I'm just going to eat one and then that's it for the week. If it's there, they're going to fight you for it until it's finished. So you have to be that gatekeeper of your home where you're bringing things in the house where whatever you bring into the house is fair game. And that will reduce the stress around mealtime because like my kids won't eat all these vegetables and stuff, but all the one is candy, all the one is crackers or whatever. I'm like, you brought that into the house. And as long as they see it, forget about it. That's what they want.
Those are both really good points. Before we go any farther, I'd kind of like to dig into that first one a little bit more. You talked about the impact of modeling on children, which really means our first step, if we want healthier children, is to make healthy choices ourselves. So as adults, we get to figure out what it takes for us to drink the water instead of the soda, to eat more vegetables, all of those things. And I do believe that is really, really powerful. Makes me think of a story of some children that I knew actually related to me. I won't go into more detail than that, but their dad would often say at the dinner table, "Oh, I hate tomatoes. Tomatoes are nasty." Well, to this day, you know, several of his children will not touch tomatoes. And they basically just never ate them, so they never developed a taste for them. And the idea they got were that tomatoes were nasty. And I mean, that's not even like one of those foods that a lot of people struggle with. Like it wasn't asparagus, it wasn't, Brussels sprouts, or which for some people are harder to eat because maybe they didn't grow up eating them. But if we actually make better choices ourselves, we can be decent role models for the children watching us eat. And I don't want to underestimate the impact that has. You,
Right.
what in your experience, like where have you seen that be really helpful?
For the
To be a role
modeling.
model. And yeah, like maybe in your own home, I don't know.
Oh yeah, in my own home, and I've seen a lot of families who, once you start talking about picky eating,
Hmm.
more than likely with kids who are picky eaters, they have at least one parent who is a picky eater. It's either the mom or the dad is usually standard. But then once you start talking about parents who sit down for dinner time and they eat, they explore and stuff, you will see that, oh, they're more adventurous eaters. They will eat anything because we're offering variety and we're sitting down together and eating. So I see that in my practice daily. Now in my home, I too, in before I started, I had a challenge, right? Where I had to start really going through all of those, where I'm mindful not only with what I ate in front of my kids, but also how I spoke about food. Like you talked about where with the this particular person who said, I don't like tomatoes. In my case, I was not even talking to my daughter about not liking a particular traditional food. I was talking to someone else about it. Right. And I did not know she was listening to me. I just said, well, I'd rather not, I don't like this food. I
What was it?
prefer
I'm just curious.
It's fufu. I'm not sure. It's
Fufu.
an
Yes, I've
African,
had
yes.
fufu.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So I I told her, I mean, it's not, I mean, it's carbs and stuff, but I was talking to my sister. I'm like, yeah, I don't like fufu. I'd rather have Gary, which is made of cassava and stuff.
Mhm.
I didn't know my daughter was listening to me. And fast forward, I can't remember what I placed food in front of her, and I say, you better finish your food. If you don't finish your food, I'm not going to take you dancing. Her response was that if you don't eat your fufu, you're not going to go running because she knows I love running.
Oh, she caught on to that technique really fast, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. She did. I'm like, okay, I had nothing. I had nothing. But then it makes you pay attention. Like sometimes even when we're not listening, even when we're not really paying attention, how we speak about food, how we label food, whether it's labeling food by giving you something sweet and sugary to go get over a stressful or painful situation, you're inherently labeling that food as good and those veggies as oh, not so good. Why didn't you give me a carrot after getting a shot of something?
Yeah.
So sometimes we do it intentionally. We're like, oh, I don't like this. But sometimes it could be really totally unintentional. Not, I didn't even think about it because that's the way you've always spoken about food or communicated about food, either directly to your kids or in conversation with other people.
That is so interesting. It reminds me of my mother-in-law who wanted her children to accept all kinds of healthy food. Turns out she personally hated asparagus, but she would eat asparagus in front of the children without any complaining or any comments. And it wasn't till my husband was an adult that he discovered that his mother never really liked asparagus.
Wow. Wow. That's a good one.
Yeah, so she kind of did it the other way. She just like pretended when she had to pretend that she liked it because it's a good and healthy food.
Yeah.
And so he was not a picky eater. In fact, while we were dating, because my interest is in cross-cultural work and I expected to live in other countries, and as I got to talking to him, I had traveled a lot growing up. I had lived internationally. And so I love traveling. I love languages. I love trying different kinds of food. Well, when I was starting to get to know my husband, I asked him, so have you ever traveled internationally? And he was like, well, we went to the Canadian sides of Niagara Falls once. And oh, yes. And we spent a day in Tijuana, and that was it. And so I was like, oh my, how is this going to work if I want to travel? And, and I'm used to being adventuresome in more ways than just food.
Right.
But I would cook for him. You know how it is when you're like fresh out of college and he was in a new job. And so he wasn't doing much cooking for himself. And
Right.
so I would cook meals and often invite him over to the apartment with, my friends and I, where we had an apartment, and we would share meals. And so I would intentionally cook foods with very different ethnic flavorings and stuff. Like I would do Middle Eastern one time, or East Indian another time, or Spanish or Mexican, or, just like different things. And he ate everything.
Wow.
And, it actually turned out that for me, that checked a very important box. We ended up getting married and spending 6 years in West Africa. And,
Wow.
and he would spend days in the bush and just eat like locally what the people were eating. And so sometimes we don't understand the ramifications of the habits that we give our children. I doubt his mother had any idea that, this would influence maybe who he ended up marrying, what he ended up doing in life. And yet it did have a close connection to many things that happened later. And
Absolutely.
it's just, to me, it's just so interesting how this works. But I know, like you mentioned, that many parents struggle with food at the table. Maybe their children are picky or they don't seem to like healthy food. So how do we make mealtime pleasant? How do we help children develop those good habits without it becoming like this big deal?
Usually, I like structure, especially when it comes to feeding kids. And the reason I say structure is because most kids will can go through the entire day just grazing off of snacks. So if you're just grazing throughout the day, oh, I want an orange, you get it. I want a bag of chips, you got it. Now I'm eating candy and stuff. And then come mealtime, I'm not hungry enough to even try whatever you put on my plate, especially if it's not sweet or it doesn't,
Mm,
it's not something I'm familiar with. So I usually start with playing out just structure where we have mealtime, we have snack times. We're not starving your kids. What that does is that you have certain meal times, you're giving the kids' digestive system time to really digest whatever they have and enough time for them to be hungry enough for the next meal. Because when we're grazing throughout the day, it's just eat, 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 eat throughout the day. So, and then the other thing that does is it creates that sense of safety for the parent where if I offer breakfast and you say no to breakfast, that's okay because I have three other opportunities to feed you. But you're not going to come back 30 minutes later and say, well, now I want a snack. No, it's not time for snack yet.
mhm,
Have it where we have structured times. Now, if a parent themselves is having a hard time, you can do a meal plan where you pick one new vegetable, you try and explore together as a family, and you try different recipes and how to make a carrot per se, right? You can have it raw, you can have it steamed, you can have it stir fried, you can add seasonings in there and make it where it's not just about the vegetable itself. It's a whole time where you connect with your kid. You get to know their preferences because as much as we are a family, we're all very unique in our taste, our texture preferences, and everything else. Where if you have that structure, you have a plan to do this together as a family. They see you trying new foods. They see you trying different stuff. They're able to then look at you doing it, say we're trying something new together as a family. And then it becomes fun and not something where we're just sitting there looking at that steamed carrots like, I don't want to eat it, but I have to eat it. But it's something where we explore together, we cooked it together, and then you give feedback. How did you like it? Is it too saggy? Is it too hard? Is it like how would you want it the next time? Okay, maybe we'll try it this other way the next time. Maybe we'll make it in a soup or add it in stir fried rice and just find different ways because sometimes I'm like, oh, it's just this vegetables. But once you step back and look at the big picture, I can make one vegetable different ways.
mm. I love that. And I love the creativity that goes into doing those sorts of things. But that piece about structure is, I think, really important. I was fortunate in that my mother structured our meals very early. Like once I was weaned and was eating like table food, right, with the rest of the family, I only ate at mealtime. Snacks were not even offered. Nobody talked about snacks. My parents didn't snack. And by the time I was 2 years old, I was doing just fine on two meals a day, breakfast and lunch. They were both hearty meals. There were no snacks. We went to bed early, and it really laid a great foundation for health for me and my siblings. And it was something that I realized even at the time, a lot of my peers' parents weren't doing. But because we grew up, that was just the way things ran in our family. We were used to not eating between meals. In fact, when I was about two, we spent a summer in Canada. And I remember, this is one of my earliest memories, but I remember being out in a blueberry patch where there were a lot of ladies picking blueberries. And one of the other ladies offered me a blueberry to eat. And I remember looking at her and going and saying, "No, thank you. It's not time to eat." And it's like, how many 2-year-olds do you know today that would do something like that, right? But
Right.
that was life. And, we never were starved. We never like suffered from hunger or anything like that. And yet, so many parents today are so afraid that their children won't grow or they won't do well if they don't eat every time they say they're hungry. And it's like, no, your kids will do so much better. And my mother never had trouble with us being picky because we were hungry when we came to the table and we would eat whatever was on the table. It was just like I didn't even know what a picky eater looked like, till way later in life.
Right.
But I want to encourage parents that if just structuring it so that mealtime is when we eat. And if your child is still struggling with mealtime, cutting out the snacks for a few days, that a hungry, healthy child will eat. And it's us that create the pickiness, I believe, when we allow children to not be hungry enough to eat the healthy food that's on their plate, and let them, like, pick and choose. So
Right.
yeah, I think those are really great tips. And we are in such a world of processed and refined foods that are addictive, that, bring on disease early. And it's like just eliminating those kinds of things from our diet totally can make such a huge difference for our children. I mean, tell me a little bit about what you're seeing in teenagers and young children in terms of disease with the way many people are being raised today.
We are now seeing a lot of high blood pressure in teenagers. Now, you talked about that structure and the snacks. The other thing I see in a lot of teenagers is they're drinking a lot of sodas, a
Mm,
lot of they're drinking a lot of their calories. Most teenagers are drinking even energy drinks. That's a new one, and half of them come in, they have high blood pressure.
mm,
We're starting to diagnose high blood pressure as early as 15, 16, where we're starting to recommend all these changes in them. The other big thing is, of course, obesity. We're seeing where, especially after 2020, it's like everybody's growth chart was going in a different direction. And it's just harder now to kind of get them back to where even when they started prior to 2020. And diabetes, of course. All of these things where by the time I was finishing my residency, it was not a pediatric condition, but we're now treating a lot of high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, high cholesterol levels, all with because of all of this.
and those are things that we never used to see till people were middle-aged. And,
Right,
we're actually looking at children now that are so sick, they may not live as long as their parents. And that's what really reversing the trend in longevity that we've had as, this country has had better sanitation and better control of infectious diseases and those sorts of things. People were living longer. And now we're seeing that, you know, life-shortening impact of these choices. So I think that what you are doing in your work to really help parents and support them to feed their children properly is so vital, not just for today and tomorrow, but for the future, for the children especially. And
right.
I really appreciate you've put together this really great gift for our listeners. Um, about kids and nutrition and picky eating. You want to tell them just a little bit about what they'll see when they click on this YouTube link?
Yeah, so on the YouTube link, I break it up in bite sizes where I have short videos and tackling different challenges that you may be experiencing with your kids and just giving you some practical tips where it's like, okay, if I have a kid who, like the last video I recorded on screen time and how screen time may be reinforcing the picking eating habit and how to reverse it again, going back to where like, okay, if you're mindlessly eating without paying attention to those hunger cues and satiety cues, you have kids who are just eating not for nourishment, but for entertainment, so to speak, because you're not listening to your body's cues and stuff. So there are bite sizes there where you can really go through and see what challenge you're facing and hopefully find something to help you start creating that better mealtime and better eating habits for your kids.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that resource. So when you click on the link that you'll find in the description below this video, you'll be able to go to those little bite-sized videos that Dr. Frundi has been sharing with us that can give you tips and practical ways to help your children develop healthy eating habits. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I want all of you that are watching to remember that health is wealth, and it comes by choice, not by chance. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me.